"Excuse me, you are in my seat." The words fell into the first-class cabin like a stone dropped into still water. Not loud, not aggressive, just clear and undeniable. The woman speaking stood in the aisle of Atlantic Airlines Flight 847, boarding pass folded neatly between her fingers, dark eyes steady on the blonde woman who had made herself comfortable in seat 1A. Eleanor Whitaker did not look up from her champagne glass. She adjusted her pearl bracelet with deliberate slowness, as if the interruption were nothing more than an annoying fly buzzing near her designer handbag. The soft lighting of the Boeing 777 caught the highlights in her perfectly styled hair, and her manicured nails drummed once against the leather armrest before she sighed. "I do not think so, sweetie." The dismissal was delivered with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of being agreed with. Eleanor Whitaker, 52 years old money socialite, had perfected the art of making other people's problems disappear through sheer force of expectation. She took another sip of her champagne and finally glanced up at the woman standing beside her seat. Amara Rodriguez Ellis stood there in designer athleisure. Clean lines, understated luxury, the kind of clothes that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. At 32, she had learned to move through the world with quiet precision. Her boarding pass read 1A, window seat, premium cabin, paid in full. "Ma'am," Amara said, her voice maintaining its calm register, "I have boarding pass 1A. Please check yours." Eleanor's eyes traveled from Amara's face down to her outfit, taking inventory. No obvious jewelry except a simple watch. No designer logo visible. Hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked like someone who belonged in coach. Maybe premium economy if she was lucky. Not here. Not in the seat Eleanor Whitaker always occupied when flying to important events. "I always sit here," Eleanor said, settling deeper into the leather seat. "Find another seat." Around them, the cabin continued its pre-flight rhythm. Flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency, stowing bags and checking overhead compartments. Other passengers settled into their seats, but a few had begun to notice the quiet standoff in the front row. A man in 2B paused with his phone halfway to his ear. A woman across the aisle glanced up from her magazine. Amara did not move. "I have boarding pass 1A. This is seat 1A. You are in my seat." Eleanor finally reached into her Hermes bag and pulled out her boarding pass with theatrical reluctance. She glanced at it, her expression shifting slightly as she read the seat assignment. 1B. Aisle seat, not window. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Recognition, perhaps embarrassment, but it was quickly replaced by indignation. "The system made an error," Eleanor declared, tucking the pass back into her bag. "I specifically requested the window seat. I need it for medical reasons." Amara looked at her boarding pass again, then back at Eleanor. "The system did not make an error. You are in the wrong seat." "Look," Eleanor said, her voice taking on a wounded tone. "I am flying to my daughter's wedding. Very important event. I have had this seat reserved for months. Surely you can find somewhere else to sit." The appeal was designed to generate sympathy, to make Amara the unreasonable one for pressing the issue. It was a practiced move, refined over decades of getting her way through a combination of status, tears, and making other people feel guilty for inconveniencing her. But Amara had seen this performance before. "Congratulations on your daughter's wedding," Amara said evenly. "Your seat is 1B. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. The wounded bird act was not working, and she could feel eyes on them now. More passengers had boarded, backing up in the aisle behind Amara. The normal flow of boarding had stuttered to a halt. "This is ridiculous," Eleanor muttered, raising her voice just enough to sound like the victim. "Ryan!" she called to a young man in an Atlantic Airlines uniform who was checking overhead bins 3 rows back. Ryan Callahan, 26 years old, turned at the sound of his name. He had the eager-to-please demeanor of someone still new enough to customer service that he believed every problem had a reasonable solution. Ryan approached with a practiced smile. "Is everything okay here, ladies?" "This girl is harassing me," Eleanor said, her voice taking on a tremulous quality. "I have been sitting here peacefully, and now she is demanding I move. I think there has been some misunderstanding with the seating." Ryan looked between them. Eleanor settled comfortably with her champagne and victim's expression, and Amara standing calmly in the aisle with her boarding pass. His customer service training kicked in automatically. Diffuse the situation. Make everyone happy. Keep the schedule on track. "Let me see your boarding passes," Ryan said diplomatically. Eleanor handed hers over with a flourish. Amara extended hers without comment. Ryan examined both passes, comparing them to his tablet. His brow furrowed slightly as he processed the information. Seat 1, A, Amara Rodriguez Ellis. Seat 1B, Eleanor Whitaker. The facts were clear and indisputable, but Ryan had learned in training that facts were not always the most important thing. Customer satisfaction scores and complaints to corporate were. "Miss Rodriguez Ellis," Ryan said, turning to Amara with an apologetic smile. "I can see you have 1A assigned, but to avoid any further disruption, would you be willing to take another window seat? We could move you to 3A, and I will make sure you get complimentary champagne for the inconvenience." There it was, the choice that revealed everything. Ask the calm one to compromise. Ask the quiet one to bend. Ask the one who was not making a scene to be reasonable. Amara felt something cold settle in her chest. Not surprised. She had been expecting this moment since the confrontation began. Recognition. This was how it always worked. The person willing to cause a scene got to keep what they wanted. The person maintaining their dignity got asked to sacrifice it. "No," Amara said simply. Ryan blinked. "I'm sorry?" "No, I have boarding pass 1A. This is seat 1A. I will be sitting in seat 1A. Amara's voice remained level, but something steel-edged had entered it. "Please ask this passenger to move to her assigned seat." Eleanor leaned forward, eyes widening as if she had been personally attacked. "How dare you? Do you know who I am?" "Before we get deeper into this, and trust me, it is about to get a lot deeper, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you have ever been told you do not belong somewhere you paid to be, if you have ever been asked to be the reasonable one while someone else threw a tantrum, this story is for you. Because what is about to happen will shut down this entire flight, rewrite airline policy, and show the world what happens when the wrong person gets underestimated. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this plays out. Trust me, you are not ready for where this goes." Ryan stood between them, feeling the weight of the decision. His training told him to de-escalate. His experience told him to satisfy the loudest customer, but the facts told him something different entirely. "Ma'am," he said to Eleanor, "your boarding pass does show seat 1B. "I do not care what it shows," Eleanor snapped. "I always sit in the window seat, always. I have status with this airline, Platinum Elite. I have been flying with Atlantic longer than this girl has probably been alive." She gestured dismissively at Amara, and something shifted in the cabin. The passengers who had been pretending not to watch were now openly staring. A man in the second row had his phone out. A woman across the aisle was leaning forward, no longer pretending to read her magazine. Amara noticed the phones. She had grown up in an age of viral videos, had built her career understanding how information moved through networks. She knew that whatever happened next would be recorded, shared, dissected. The thought did not make her angry. It made her careful. "Ryan," Amara said, her voice carrying clearly enough that the microphones would pick it up. "I paid for seat 1A. I have a confirmed boarding pass for seat 1A. Are you going to enforce your airline seating policy, or are you going to ask me to give up what I paid for to accommodate someone who is in the wrong seat?" Ryan felt sweat gathering under his collar. This was not supposed to be this hard. Customer complaints were one thing, but this was different. This felt like a test he had not studied for. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we could find a solution that works for everyone. Miss Rodriguez Ellis, we have some lovely seats in business class that—" Amara's voice cut through his suggestion like a blade. "I am in business class. This is business class. First class on this aircraft. I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Eleanor had been watching this exchange with growing frustration. She was not used to being ignored, was not used to watching someone else command attention. Her daughter's wedding was tomorrow. She had planned this trip for months, had specifically chosen this seat because it was what she always did, because consistency was the only thing that made her feel in control anymore.
"This is insane," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "I am not moving. I was here first. Possession is 9/10 of the law."
"Actually," said a voice from the second row, "that is not how airline seats work." Everyone turned to look at Connor Ellis, a travel influencer in his early 30s who had been recording the exchange on his phone since it began. He had a following of over 100,000 people across social media platforms, and he knew compelling content when he saw it.
"I am sorry," Eleanor said, "but this is a private conversation."
"Actually, it is not," Connor said. "You are on an airplane in public, having this argument loud enough for everyone to hear, and lady, you are so clearly in the wrong that it is not even funny." "Turn that off," Eleanor demanded. "Turn what off?" "My phone?" "In public on an airplane." Connor's voice carried the practiced cadence of someone used to narrating for an audience. "Y'all, I am live streaming from Atlantic Airlines Flight 847, and we have got a situation up here. White woman in the wrong seat refusing to move, asking the black woman with the correct boarding pass to give up her seat." The words live streaming hit Ryan like a physical blow. This was not just a customer service issue anymore. This was being broadcast in real time to however many people were watching. Corporate would see this. His supervisor would see this. Everyone would see this. "Sir," Ryan said to Connor, "I need you to stop recording." "Why?" Connor asked, genuinely curious. "What law am I breaking?" Ryan realized he did not have an answer for that. Recording in public was not illegal. Recording on an airplane was not prohibited, and trying to stop someone from recording would only make the situation look worse. Amara watched this unfold with something approaching admiration. She had not asked Connor to start recording, had not planned for social media documentation, but she was not going to stop it either. "Ryan," Amara said again, "are you going to ask this passenger to move to her assigned seat, or do you need to call a supervisor?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ryan looked around the cabin, acutely aware that dozens of eyes were on him, that phones were recording, that whatever he did next would be captured and shared and judged. Eleanor Whitaker sensed that the momentum was slipping away from her. She had expected Ryan to handle this quickly, to move the other woman somewhere else and let her keep the window seat she wanted. Instead, this was turning into a spectacle. "Fine," she said, suddenly standing up with jerky movements. "Fine, I will move. But this is reverse discrimination, and I'm going to file a complaint." She began gathering her belongings, purse, magazine, champagne glass, with sharp, angry movements. For a moment, it looked like the confrontation would end there. Amara would take her seat, Eleanor would take hers, and the flight would continue. But as Eleanor moved toward seat 1B, she turned back to Amara with a look of pure venom. "People like you," she said loud enough for the entire front section to hear, "always have to make everything about race, don't you?" The cabin went dead silent. Amara stood perfectly still, her expression unchanged, but inside she felt something click into place. The line had been crossed. This was not about a seat anymore. This was not about customer service or airline policy, or even Eleanor Whitaker's obvious sense of entitlement. This was about something much bigger. "Actually," Amara said, her voice carrying with crystal clarity, "people like me just want to sit in the seats we paid for." She paused, letting the words settle. "But now that you have made it about race, let us talk about what that really means." Amara pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts with deliberate calm, thumb moving with the kind of precision that came from years of navigating high-stakes moments. Around her, the cabin had fallen into an uncomfortable hush, the kind of silence that preceded something significant. She could feel the weight of attention, the held breath of passengers pretending not to watch while recording everything on their phones. "People like me," Amara repeated softly, her finger hovering over a contact name. "Let me tell you about people like me, Eleanor." The words triggered a memory that hit Amara with unexpected force. Suddenly, she was 17 again, standing in the gleaming corridors of the Johnson Space Center in Houston, clutching a folder containing 3 months of work that would change satellite navigation forever. The NASA Goddard internship had been the opportunity of a lifetime. Amara Rodriguez Ellis, 17 years old, daughter of a Puerto Rican mother and a black father, selected from thousands of applicants to work with the premier satellite navigation team in the country. She had spent every morning that summer at 4 a.m. coding algorithms that could predict atmospheric interference with GPS signals, work that was years ahead of what graduate students were producing. The presentation day had arrived. Interns would show their projects to the department heads, with the best work being fast-tracked into active satellite programs. Amara had practiced her presentation dozens of times, could recite the technical specifications in her sleep, knew her algorithm was revolutionary. She stood outside conference room A, watching through the glass as Dr. Bradley Morrison, her white supervisor, clicked through slides that contained her work, her code, her breakthrough, her innovation. But the presentation slides bore his name. The research credit listed him as lead developer. Inside, the department heads nodded appreciatively as Dr. Morrison explained his revolutionary approach to atmospheric prediction modeling. Amara watched him gesture confidently at equations she had derived, heard him field technical questions using answers she had prepared for him. "Amara," Dr. Morrison had called out, noticing her in the hallway, "could you grab us some coffee? The presentation is running a bit long." She had stood there for a moment, 17 years old, watching her future being stolen in real time. Then she had smiled politely, said, "Of course," and walked to the break room. Not because she was weak, not because she did not understand what was happening, but because she was calculating. That night, Amara sat in her dorm room and wrote the first lines of code that would eventually become SkyNav Technologies. Not for revenge, for invisibility proofing. She would build something so undeniably hers, so clearly bearing her fingerprints that no one could ever take credit for her work again. Amara blinked, returning to the present moment. Eleanor Whitaker was watching her with a mixture of annoyance and uncertainty, perhaps finally realizing that this quiet woman in designer athleisure might not be the easy target she had assumed. "You want to know about people like me, Eleanor?" Amara said, her thumb still hovering over her phone. "I was 17 when someone like you tried to erase me. It did not work then. It will not work now." Ryan Callahan stood frozen between them, sweat beading on his forehead as he realized this situation was spiraling far beyond his training manual. He had dealt with seat disputes before, with entitled passengers and customer service challenges. But this felt different. This felt like something that would end up in corporate training videos for years to come. Ryan had his own story, though he was not thinking about it now. 26 years old, first-generation college graduate drowning in student loan debt that made his parents' house payment look like pocket change. He had taken the Atlantic Airlines job because it offered benefits, travel opportunities, and the chance to work his way up through the company. What it mostly offered was entitled passengers, impossible schedules, and the constant fear of complaint letters that could end his career before it started. His training had been clear: prioritize customer satisfaction, de-escalate conflicts, make everyone feel heard and valued. What his training had not covered was what to do when customer satisfaction meant asking the right person to sacrifice their rights for the wrong person's comfort. Behind Ryan, Isabella Reyes observed the standoff with the weary recognition of someone who had seen this movie before. 15 years with Atlantic Airlines, starting as a flight attendant and working her way up to senior cabin crew, Isabella had developed a sixth sense for passenger conflicts that would turn ugly. She was tired, bone deep, soul tired from years of managing other people's bad behavior at 35,000 feet. She had seen the entitled passengers who treated crew like servants, the nervous flyers who took their anxiety out on anyone in uniform, the business travelers who acted like their ticket price entitled them to rewrite the laws of physics. But she had also seen the quiet moments. The crew member who spent 20 minutes helping an elderly passenger understand their medication schedule. The captain who personally escorted a nervous child to see the cockpit. The system, when it worked, could be beautiful. When it did not work, it could be devastating. Right now, watching Ryan flounder and Eleanor dig in, and Amara prepare for something that looked like war, Isabella could see exactly how this was going to end. Someone was going to make a decision in the next few minutes that would define careers, destroy reputations, and probably change company policy forever. She just was not sure who. Connor Ellis continued recording his phone, capturing every nuance of the confrontation. As a travel influencer, he had built his following by finding the human stories behind the travel experience. Delayed flights, lost luggage, customer service failures. These were the moments that resonated with his audience because everyone had been there. But this was different. This was not just a customer service failure. This was a window into something much larger, much more fundamental about how power worked, how bias operated, how systems failed, not through malice, but through the simple momentum of assumption. Connor knew viral content when he saw it. This had all the elements: clear injustice, compelling characters, real-time drama, and the kind of resolution that would leave people talking for months. His live stream was already pulling viewers, comments flowing in faster than he could read them. "Y'all," Connor said quietly into his phone, "I do not think any of us are ready for what is about to happen." Captain Sofia Ramirez was in the cockpit running through her pre-flight checklist when she heard the commotion filtering up from the main cabin. 28 years of flying, starting with military transport and transitioning to commercial aviation, had given her an instinct for trouble. The quality of sound from the cabin had changed. Less shuffling and small talk, more focused attention. Sophia believed in rules, protocols, and the chain of command. But she also believed in fairness. Her military background had taught her that unclear orders led to mission failure, and mission failure got people hurt. Right now, she could sense that someone in her cabin was failing to give clear orders. She made a note to check on the situation before taxi. Isabella Torres was monitoring the boarding process from the gate when she noticed the delay. 24 years old, recently promoted to ground crew supervisor, Isabella took pride in keeping flights on schedule. A delay during boarding usually meant overhead bin issues or passenger medical situations, routine problems with routine solutions. But her radio had been quiet. No calls for assistance, no requests for medical personnel, no reports of equipment malfunction. Just delay. She made a mental note to follow up. Eleanor Whitaker, meanwhile, was experiencing something entirely foreign to her carefully constructed world: consequences. Eleanor had built her life around certainty, inherited wealth, social connections, the kind of status that opened doors and removed obstacles before she even knew they existed. At 52, she had never encountered a situation that could not be resolved through a combination of authority, tears, and the implicit understanding that other people's comfort mattered less than hers. Her daughter's wedding had already challenged that understanding. Emma Palmer Chen had planned an intimate ceremony specifically to limit her mother's involvement, choosing a small venue that could not accommodate Eleanor's extensive social circle, selecting vendors who prioritized Emma's vision over Eleanor's status. This flight, this seat, this window view was supposed to be Eleanor's small consolation. First class to London, then the channel to Paris for the wedding. Elegant, sophisticated, the kind of travel experience that reminded her who she was and where she belonged in the world. Instead, she was being challenged by someone she had dismissed without a second thought, recorded by strangers, and forced to confront the possibility that her version of reality might not be universally accepted. The worst part was the growing suspicion that she was catastrophically wrong about who this woman really was. Amara finished scrolling through her contacts and looked up at Eleanor with an expression that was perfectly calm and absolutely terrifying. "You asked if I know who you are, Eleanor. The better question is, do you know who I am?" She tapped a name in her contacts and put the phone on speaker. The number rang twice before connecting. Amara. The voice was male, slightly accented, warm with familiar affection and sharp with concern. "You should be airborne by now." Every person in the front section of the aircraft went completely silent. Ryan felt his stomach drop. Isabella stepped closer, her experienced ear catching something in the tone that spelled trouble. Eleanor's face went pale as she registered that Amara had just put someone on speakerphone in the middle of their dispute. Julian, Amara said calmly, we have a problem. What kind of problem? The voice sharpened, losing its warmth and taking on the clipped efficiency of someone used to solving problems quickly. A passenger in seat 1B has refused crew instructions, made discriminatory remarks, and is disrupting boarding operations. Put me on speaker for the cabin. I want everyone to hear this. Amara held the phone higher. Her voice carried clearly across the first-class section. Everyone in seats 1 through 5, please listen. This is Amara Rodriguez Ellis speaking to Julian Mendoza. The names hung in the air like a revelation waiting to be understood. Ryan's face went completely white as recognition dawned. Isabella felt her knees go weak. Eleanor Whitaker stared at Amara with growing horror as pieces began clicking together in her mind. Julian Mendoza, the CEO of Atlantic Airlines, Amara finished calmly. Julian, meet the passengers. There was a pause that lasted exactly 3 seconds and felt like an hour. Good afternoon. Julian Mendoza's voice came through the speaker with the kind of authority that stopped conversations and commanded immediate attention. This is Julian Mendoza, Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Airlines. I understand we have a situation that requires my personal attention. Ryan Callahan made a sound that was not quite a whimper. Eleanor Whitaker began to understand that she had made a mistake that was about to cost her more than a window seat. And Amara Rodriguez Ellis smiled for the first time since boarding the aircraft. Julian, she said pleasantly, let me introduce you to Eleanor Whitaker. She would like to explain to you why she thinks passenger boarding passes are optional. The phone hummed with digital silence as passengers in first class and business class held their breath, waiting to discover exactly how expensive this particular mistake was about to become. The silence that followed Amara's introduction stretched across the cabin like a wire pulled tight. Eleanor Whitaker's face cycled through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, denial, and finally a kind of desperate fury that came from realizing the ground had shifted beneath her feet. This is a setup, Eleanor said, her voice shaking with indignation. This is some kind of elaborate setup. Julian Mendoza's voice came through the speaker with measured calm. Ms. Whitaker, is it? Let me be very clear. There is no setup. There is a passenger in seat 1A who belongs there, and a passenger in seat 1B who has apparently decided that boarding passes are suggestions rather than assignments. I do not believe this, Eleanor said, looking around the cabin as if searching for hidden cameras. You cannot just claim to know the CEO. Anyone can fake a phone call. Amara looked at Ryan, whose face had gone through several shades of pale and was now settling on a sickly green. Ryan, you have Julian Mendoza's direct number in your crew communication system, do you not? Ryan nodded mutely. Call it. Ryan fumbled for his tablet with shaking hands. The crew communication system contained direct contact numbers for senior management to be used only in extreme emergencies. He had never imagined he would need to verify the identity of someone's phone call, but then again, he had never imagined most of what was happening right now. He found the number, compared it to the digits displayed on Amara's phone screen, and felt what was left of his career prospects crumble into dust. It is the same number, Ryan whispered. Of course it is, Julian said through the speaker. Now Ryan, it is Ryan Callahan, correct? Based on the crew manifest I am looking at, would you like to explain to me how this situation developed? Ryan opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. The truth was too terrible to speak aloud. He had made assumptions. He had looked at Amara and seen someone he could safely ask to compromise. He had looked at Eleanor and seen someone whose comfort mattered more than policy. There was a seating dispute, Ryan managed. I can see that. What I want to understand is why my partner, who has a confirmed seat assignment and a valid boarding pass, is standing in the aisle while another passenger occupies her seat. The word partner hit the cabin like a physical force. Amara Rodriguez Ellis was not just a passenger, she was Julian Mendoza's partner, business partner. The implications were staggering. Isabella Reyes stepped forward, her years of experience finally overriding her paralysis. Mr. Mendoza, this is Isabella Reyes, senior flight attendant. I apologize, but I need to understand the situation myself. Miss Rodriguez Ellis, could you clarify your relationship to Mr. Mendoza? Amara looked at Isabella with something approaching respect. At least someone was asking direct questions instead of drowning in assumptions. Julian and I are co-founders of SkyNav Technologies. Atlantic Airlines is our primary development partner for implementing our satellite navigation improvements across your fleet. Amara's voice was calm, factual. This flight was specifically chosen because it is equipped with our prototype equipment, which I will be demonstrating to the European Space Consortium when we reach optimal altitude. The implications crashed over Ryan like a wave. This was not just any passenger. This was someone whose work was integrated into the airline's future, whose technology was worth millions, whose relationship with the company was foundational to its competitive advantage, and he had asked her to give up her seat to make a problem passenger go away. "Ryan," Julian said, "I want you to understand something very clearly. Miss Rodriguez Ellis is not just my business partner. She is the reason Atlantic Airlines will be the most technologically advanced airline in the world within 2 years. The satellite navigation system that will save this company millions in fuel costs, reduce delays, and improve safety margins. That is her work." Ryan made a sound like air being let out of a balloon. But Eleanor Whitaker was not finished. Instead of backing down, instead of recognizing the magnitude of her mistake, she doubled down with the fury of someone who had never been truly challenged. "I do not care if she is the Queen of England," Eleanor snapped. "I was sitting in that seat first. I have status with this airline, Platinum Elite. I have been flying with Atlantic longer than this. This person has probably been alive." She gestured dismissively at Amara, and something shifted in the cabin. The racial undertone was not subtle anymore. It hung in the air like smoke, visible to everyone and impossible to ignore. Connor Ellis leaned closer to his phone. "Y'all, she really just said this person. We are watching someone destroy their entire life in real time." "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, her voice rising, "I am flying to my daughter's wedding, a family emergency. Surely that takes precedence over some business meeting." Amara listened to this with the expression of someone watching a fascinating scientific experiment. She had seen this before: the escalation, the appeals to emotion, the attempt to reframe obvious wrongdoing as understandable desperation. "Julian," Amara said into the phone, "are you getting this? Every word?" "And I am recording it." Julian's voice had taken on the clipped efficiency of someone making decisions in real time. "Ms. Whitaker, your status level, your travel purpose, and your length of relationship with this airline are all irrelevant to the fact that you are sitting in someone else's seat and refusing direct crew instructions to move." "This is discrimination," Eleanor declared. "You are treating me differently because I am white." The accusation landed in the cabin like a grenade. Several passengers gasped audibly. Connor Ellis's live stream exploded with comments faster than he could read them. Amara felt something cold and sharp settle behind her ribs. Here it was. The moment when the mask came off completely, when the real beliefs emerged from beneath the polite veneer. "Actually, Eleanor," Amara said, her voice carrying with crystal clarity, "I am being treated differently because I am black. You are being treated exactly like every other passenger who refuses to follow basic airline policies." "That is not true, is it not? When was the last time you were asked to show ID to prove you belonged in first class? When was the last time crew suggested you take a different seat to avoid disruption? When was the last time you had to justify your right to sit where you paid to sit?" Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, then closed it as she realized she did not have an answer. Julian Mendoza's voice cut through the tension. "Ryan, I want you to call airport security immediately. Miss Whitaker is to be removed from this aircraft." "Wait," Ryan said, panic creeping into his voice. "Mr. Mendoza, maybe we can resolve this without—" "Without what?" Julian cut him off. "Without consequences?" "Ryan, let me explain something to you about consequences. They are not optional. Call security now." Ryan looked around the cabin desperately, as if hoping someone would offer him an alternative. But every face he saw reflected the same understanding. This had gone too far to be walked back. He lifted his radio with a trembling hand. "Ground control. This is Flight 847. We need airport security at Gate A12 immediately." "Flight 847, what is the nature of the emergency?" Ryan glanced at Amara, at Eleanor, at the dozens of recording phones pointed in his direction. Passenger non-compliance with crew instructions. Eleanor Whitaker felt the world tilting beneath her feet. You cannot do this. I have rights. I have status. I am flying to my daughter's wedding. You have the right to sit in the seat you paid for, Julian said through the speaker, which is 1B. You have the right to follow crew instructions, which you have refused to do. You have the right to treat other passengers with basic human dignity, which you have also refused to do. I want to speak to someone in charge, Eleanor said. Ms. Whitaker, Julian said with the patience of someone explaining something to a child. You are speaking to someone in charge. I am the person in charge, and I am telling you to gather your belongings and prepare to be escorted from this aircraft. Amara watched Eleanor's face cycle through the stages of realization. This was not a customer service dispute anymore. This was not something that could be resolved with the right manager or the appropriate level of complaint. This was a public humiliation being broadcast live with consequences that would follow Eleanor Whitaker long after this flight was just a memory. Ryan, Julian continued, how long until security arrives? Ryan checked his radio. Ground control estimates 3 minutes. Good. Amara, I want you to know that this incident will trigger a complete review of our crew training protocols. What happened here today, the initial response, the assumptions made, the request for you to compromise instead of enforcing company policy, none of that is acceptable. Ryan felt his career prospects dimming with each word. Mr. Mendoza, I was just trying to... You were trying to take the path of least resistance, Julian cut him off. You assumed that asking the quiet passenger to move would be easier than enforcing the rules with the loud one. That assumption revealed a bias in your training, your judgment, or both. Amara felt a complex mix of emotions as she listened to Julian dissect Ryan's choices. There was satisfaction in seeing the bias exposed, but also something like sadness. Ryan was not evil. He was just young, undertrained, and working within a culture that had taught him to prioritize the wrong things. Ryan will be suspended pending a full investigation, Julian continued. Isabella, you will be filing a detailed incident report, and this aircraft will not move until I am satisfied that everyone involved understands exactly what went wrong and how we will prevent it from happening again. Eleanor Whitaker sank into seat 1B with the expression of someone watching their world collapse. Her daughter's wedding was tomorrow. Her status with the airline was clearly about to be revoked, and every second of her public humiliation was being broadcast to thousands of people who were watching her learn that consequences existed even for people like her. This is not over, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction now. Amara looked down at her with something that was not quite pity. Yes, it is. Airport security appeared at the cabin entrance. 2 officers in crisp uniforms who surveyed the scene with professional calm. They had seen passenger disputes before, but the tension in this cabin suggested something more significant than the usual drunk traveler or missed connection meltdown. Officers, Isabella Reyes stepped forward. We have a passenger in seat 1B who has refused multiple crew instructions to comply with boarding procedures. The senior officer, a middle-aged Latina woman with sergeant stripes, looked at the passenger manifest on her tablet. Miss Whitaker, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us. Eleanor looked up at the officers with the desperate hope of someone reaching for a life preserver. Officers, this is a misunderstanding. I am being discriminated against. This woman, she pointed at Amara, is getting special treatment because she claims to know the CEO. The officer looked at Amara, then at the phone Amara was still holding with Julian Mendoza's voice coming through the speaker. Ms. Whitaker, the officer said patiently, are you sitting in your assigned seat? Eleanor glanced at her boarding pass. Well, technically no. Have you been instructed by crew members to move to your assigned seat? Yes. Have you complied with those instructions? Eleanor's mouth moved soundlessly for a moment. No, but there were extenuating circumstances. Ma'am, please gather your belongings. We need you to come with us. As Eleanor Whitaker stood to collect her purse and carry on, her hands shaking with humiliation and rage, Julian Mendoza's voice filled the cabin one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Julian Mendoza, CEO of Atlantic Airlines. I want to personally apologize to every passenger on this aircraft for the disruption you have witnessed. What happened here today represents a failure of training, policy, and judgment that does not reflect the values of this company or this industry." He paused, and Amara could hear him choosing his words carefully. "Every passenger on this aircraft, regardless of race, nationality, gender, or any other characteristic, has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. Every passenger has the right to occupy the seat they paid for without being asked to sacrifice their comfort for someone else's convenience. These are not aspirational goals. They are minimum standards." Eleanor Whitaker walked down the aisle escorted by security, her designer luggage trailing behind her, her face burning with shame and fury. As she passed Connor Ellis, he leaned slightly toward his camera. "And there she goes, y'all. The consequences of thinking your status entitles you to someone else's seat, someone else's dignity, someone else's respect." Amara took her seat in 1A finally. The leather was soft, the view was clear, and the subtle hum of the aircraft around her felt like a promise that some machines at least worked exactly as they were designed to. Julian Mendoza's voice came through the speaker one last time, quieter now, personal. "Amara, are you okay?" Amara looked out the window at the tarmac, at the ground crew preparing for departure, at the world that had just shifted slightly on its axis. "I am good, Julian, thank you." "Good. Now let us get you to London so you can change the world." Amara smiled, ended the call, and opened her laptop. She had a satellite demonstration to prepare for, a future to build, and exactly minutes to reach the altitude where her technology would prove that sometimes the quiet revolution was the most powerful one of all. Around her, the cabin buzzed with uncertainty. No one spoke to her now. No one dared. And somewhere beyond the glass, beyond the tarmac, beyond the noise, a deal worth billions waited for altitude, timing, and a woman the world had almost dismissed as invisible. Connor Ellis had been live streaming for minutes when his follower count started exploding. What had begun as a routine travel vlog from Atlantic Airlines Flight 847 had transformed into something unprecedented, a real-time documentation of discrimination, justice, and the kind of corporate accountability that people usually only dreamed about. "Y'all," Connor whispered into his camera as Eleanor Whitaker disappeared down the jet bridge with airport security. "I need everyone watching this to understand what we just witnessed. This was not just about a seat. This was about every time someone has been told to be reasonable while someone else threw a tantrum. Every time someone has been asked to give up what they paid for to keep the peace. Every time someone has been asked to absorb someone else's bad behavior to avoid conflict." The comment section of his stream was moving so fast that individual messages blurred into a wall of outrage, support, and disbelief. "Seat stolen" had already been tweeted thousands of times. Atlantic Airlines was trending, and "Amara deserves her seat" was spreading across platforms with the viral velocity that only comes from touching something universally experienced. Traveling. "Mama, 47. I have been that black woman standing in the aisle while they asked me to move for someone else's comfort." Business Traveler, 2023. Finally, someone with actual power held them accountable in real time. Justice Seeker. That CEO just changed airline policy live on the internet. I am crying. Connor read the comments as they flowed past, recognizing the cathartic release happening in digital space. People were sharing their own stories, times they had been profiled, dismissed, asked to accommodate someone else's bias. The stream had become a confession booth, a support group, a celebration all at once. Meanwhile, Ryan Callahan stood near the galley in a state of shock that bordered on clinical. In the span of minutes, he had gone from routine customer service to career-ending catastrophe. His hands shook as he tried to process what had just happened. Isabella Reyes approached him with the expression of someone delivering bad news. "Ryan, Mr. Mendoza wants you to call the crew scheduling office immediately. You are being relieved of duty pending investigation." Ryan nodded numbly. He understood the words intellectually, but emotionally he was still stuck in the moment when he had suggested Amara move to a different seat. Such a small decision, such reasonable-seeming logic, such catastrophic consequences. "Isabella," Ryan said quietly, "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was de-escalating." Isabella looked at him with something between sympathy and disappointment. Ryan, in 15 years of flying, I have learned that de-escalation never involves asking the person being wronged to sacrifice more. Real de-escalation means addressing the actual problem, not managing around it. But your training failed you. Our training failed you. That is why everything is about to change. Ryan walked toward the crew communication phone, each step feeling like he was walking toward the end of something. As he passed Amara's seat, he stopped. Miss Rodriguez Ellis, he said quietly, I want you to know that I am sorry. I made assumptions that I should not have made, and I let those assumptions guide my decisions. That is on me, not on my training or the company. Amara looked up at him. She saw a young man who had learned something terrible about himself in the most public way possible. There was humiliation in his face, but also something else. Understanding. Growth. The painful recognition that came from having your blind spots exposed under the harsh light of consequences. Ryan, Amara said, what matters now is what you do with this lesson. Ryan nodded, swallowed hard, and continued toward the phone that would end his career with Atlantic Airlines. Captain Sophia Ramirez emerged from the cockpit as the security officers disappeared with Eleanor Whitaker. Sophia had been monitoring the situation through crew communications, and what she had heard had required her to make some difficult decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, Sophia announced to the cabin, this is your captain speaking. I want to address what just occurred in our forward cabin because it impacts every person on this aircraft. The cabin fell silent. Even Connor turned his camera toward the cockpit door. What you witnessed was a failure of our crew to enforce basic airline policies consistently and fairly. As captain of this aircraft, I take full responsibility for that failure. Effective immediately, this flight is implementing new protocols to ensure that every passenger is treated with equal dignity and respect. Sophia's voice carried the authority of 28 years in aviation, but also something more personal, something that suggested she had been thinking about these issues long before today's incident forced them into the open. To be clear, Sophia continued, passenger seat assignments are not suggestions. They are contractual obligations that we will enforce uniformly, regardless of status, race, gender, or any other factor. Crew members who fail to enforce these policies consistently will be removed from duty immediately. Amara listened to this announcement with mixed feelings. She was glad to see accountability, but she also understood that real change would require more than new policies. It would require a fundamental shift in how the industry thought about bias, assumption, and the distribution of inconvenience. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian Mendoza. Press is picking this up. Your choice whether to comment. Amara considered this as she watched ground crew prepare the aircraft for departure. She could remain silent, let the story speak for itself, or she could use this moment to say something larger about the experience of being underestimated, dismissed, and then vindicated in spectacular fashion. She opened the video camera on her phone and began to record. My name is Amara Rodriguez Ellis, she said quietly, and I want to address what just happened on this flight because I think there are some important lessons that extend far beyond airline seating. Connor noticed that Amara was recording and pointed his camera toward her, creating a dual documentation of her response. 40 minutes ago, I boarded this flight and found someone in my assigned seat. That is not unusual. Seat confusion happens. What happened next was that I was asked to give up my seat to avoid disruption, despite having the correct boarding pass, and following all airline policies. Amara paused, choosing her words carefully. I was not asked to move because the system was broken. I was asked to move because it was easier to ask me to compromise than to enforce the rules with someone who was making a scene. That is not customer service. That is bias management. The cabin was completely silent now, every passenger listening to Amara's measured words. The assumption was that I would be reasonable, that I would understand, that I would absorb the cost of someone else's entitlement to keep things running smoothly. And for many people in many situations, that assumption is correct. People give up their seats, their spots in line, their opportunities to speak because they are told it is the reasonable thing to do. Amara's voice remained calm, but something steel-edged entered it. But, Sometimes being reasonable means standing your ground. Sometimes being reasonable means making other people face the consequences of their choices instead of absorbing those consequences yourself. She looked directly into her camera. What happened today happened because I had the resources and connections to demand accountability in real time. Most people do not have a CEO's direct number. Most people do not have business relationships that give them leverage. Most people just have to accept being asked to move, being told to be understanding, being sacrificed for someone else's comfort. Amara set the phone down and looked around the cabin at the faces watching her. That is the real problem. Not that people like Eleanor Whitaker exist, but that our solutions to dealing with people like Eleanor Whitaker always seem to involve asking someone else to give up what they have paid for. Connor Ellis felt chills running down his arms as he recorded Amara's impromptu speech. This was not just a response to a single incident. This was an articulation of something that people experienced but rarely had the language to express. The comments on his live stream reflected that recognition. Working mom of 3. She just explained my entire life experience in 3 minutes. Teacher tired. This is why I always end up giving up my conference room, my parking spot, my lunch break. New grad nurse. The quiet ones always get asked to be reasonable while the loud ones get accommodated. Isabella Torres had been monitoring the situation from the gate, watching departure time slip as the situation on board escalated. But as ground crew supervisor, she also had access to the gate communication system, which meant she had heard every word of the confrontation between Amara and Eleanor Whitaker. Isabella was 24 years old, recently promoted and acutely aware of being one of the few Latina women in supervisory positions at her airport. She understood exactly what Amara meant about being asked to be reasonable. She keyed her radio. Flight 847, this is ground operations. We are expediting your departure clearance. Priority taxi approved. It was a small gesture, but Isabella wanted to send a signal that someone in the airport operations chain understood the significance of what had just occurred. Inside the aircraft, passengers were processing the confrontation in different ways. Some were already sharing clips on social media. Others were calling friends and family to describe what they had witnessed. A few were examining their own behavior, thinking about times they had asked the wrong person to compromise to solve a problem. An elderly white man in seat 3A approached Amara as she finished her recording. "Miss," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I have been flying for 30 years. And I have seen exactly what you are talking about, more times than I can count. I am ashamed to say that I have never spoken up before. Thank you for showing me what standing your ground looks like." Amara nodded at him. "Thank you for saying that. It matters more than you know." The man returned to his seat, and Amara noticed that the energy in the cabin had shifted. The uncomfortable tension of watching discrimination unfold had been replaced by something else. Not quite celebration, but recognition. The feeling of watching something important happen, something that would be remembered. Captain Sofia Ramirez announced that they had been cleared for departure and the aircraft began to taxi toward the runway. Amara opened her laptop and began the final preparations for her satellite demonstration. As the plane lifted off from JFK, climbing toward the altitude where Amara's technology would prove its worth to the European Space Consortium, Connor Ellis addressed his live stream audience one final time. "Y'all, we just watched history being made, not because someone important got their way, but because someone refused to be made small, because someone stood their ground when it would have been easier to bend." He paused, watching New York City shrink beneath them. If you have ever been told to be reasonable while someone else acted unreasonable, if you have ever given up what was rightfully yours to keep the peace, if you have ever absorbed someone else's bad behavior to avoid conflict, this one was for you. The stream ended, but the conversation was just beginning. Across social media platforms, in airport bars and airplane cabins, in corporate training rooms and diversity seminars, people were sharing Amara's words, discussing Eleanor's choices, debating Ryan's assumptions. Stand Your Ground was trending worldwide. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, Amara Rodriguez Ellis prepared to demonstrate that sometimes the quietest revolutions change everything. The Boeing 777 climbed steadily through 35,000 feet, its engines humming with the kind of precision that came from decades of engineering refinement. In seat 1A, Amara Rodriguez Ellis opened her laptop and initiated the connection sequence that would link her personal device to the aircraft's experimental navigation system. The irony was not lost on her that she was about to demonstrate her revolutionary technology on the same flight where she had been asked to give up her seat to accommodate someone else's racism. Amara's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, entering authorization codes that would grant her access to Skynav's prototype satellite interface. This was the moment she had been working toward for 3 years, the final demonstration that would secure the European Space Consortium contract and establish her company as the leader in next-generation aviation technology. Her phone buzzed. Julian Mendoza. Amara, how are you holding up? Fine, she replied, keeping her voice low. Beginning the demonstration sequence now. Good. And Amara, the press response is significant. Stand Your Ground is trending in 12 countries. The video of you explaining bias management has been shared over 50,000 times in the last hour. Amara paused in her typing. She had been focused on the technical demonstration, but the social impact was clearly spiraling beyond anything she had anticipated. Julian, I want to be clear about something. This was not planned. I did not orchestrate this for publicity. I know that, which is exactly why it is so powerful. You responded to discrimination with dignity. And when you had the chance to use your platform, you used it to educate rather than retaliate. Amara looked out the window at the cloud layer below them. What is the company's official position? Full accountability. Ryan Callahan is suspended pending investigation. We are implementing mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff. And Eleanor Whitaker's Platinum Elite status has been permanently revoked across all partner airlines. What about Ryan? He is young, Amara. He made a mistake, but he made a choice based on racial bias. Whether that came from training, personal prejudice, or cultural conditioning does not matter to the passenger who gets discriminated against. Julian paused. But you are right that he is young. If the investigation shows he is genuinely remorseful and committed to learning, he might get a second chance. Emphasis on might. Amara nodded, returning her attention to the laptop screen. The satellite connection was establishing, pulling in data from 3 orbital platforms simultaneously. In 5 minutes, she would be demonstrating technology that could revolutionize aviation safety and efficiency. But first, she had a more immediate concern. Julian, there is something else. The passenger who was removed, Eleanor Whitaker. I looked her up during taxi. Her daughter is getting married tomorrow in Paris. The wedding is why she was flying, and she is going to miss it because of this. Julian was quiet for a moment. Amara, you are not responsible for the consequences of her choices. I know that, but I also know what it feels like to have your family disappointed in you. What are you thinking? Amara pulled up her contacts and found a number she had not expected to use today. I am thinking that justice and mercy do not have to be mutually exclusive. Before Julian could respond, Amara ended the call and dialed a different number. Atlantic Airlines Customer Service, this is Jennifer. How may I help you? Jennifer, this is Amara Rodriguez Ellis. I was a passenger on Flight 847 that departed JFK an hour ago. I need you to connect me to your senior customer relations manager immediately. Ma'am, I would be happy to help you myself. Jennifer, Google my name, Amara Rodriguez Ellis, Atlantic Airlines. Then transfer me to the senior manager. This is regarding the incident that is currently trending on social media. There was a pause, the sound of rapid typing, then a sharp intake of breath. Please hold, Miss Rodriguez Ellis. I am connecting you immediately. While Amara waited on hold, her laptop chimed with an incoming notification. The satellite link was fully established. Her technology was now interfacing with the aircraft's navigation systems, providing real-time atmospheric data that was more precise and comprehensive than anything currently available to commercial aviation. The European Space Consortium would be impressed. The contract would be hers. Skynav technologies would become the industry standard for satellite-assisted navigation. But Amara found herself thinking about Emma Palmer-Chen, who would walk down the aisle tomorrow without her mother in attendance. Miss Rodriguez Ellis, this is David Chen, Senior Customer Relations Manager. I want to personally apologize for what happened on your flight today. We are taking immediate action to ensure this never happens again. David, I appreciate that, but I am calling about Eleanor Whitaker. There was a surprised pause. The passenger who was removed? Yes. Her daughter is getting married tomorrow in Paris. I want to know if there is any way she can still make it. Miss Rodriguez Ellis, I have to say, after what she put you through, your concern for her travel plans is unexpected. Amara looked out at the clouds below, thinking about 17-year-old Amara, watching someone else present her work, about the choice between bitterness and something harder but ultimately more powerful. David, Eleanor Whitaker said terrible things today. She acted from a place of entitlement and prejudice that caused real harm. But missing her daughter's wedding is not going to teach her anything useful. It is just going to make her more bitter. What are you proposing? Is there another flight she can take if she issues a genuine public apology and commits to completing bias training? Could Atlantic get her to Paris in time for the ceremony? David was quiet for so long that Amara wondered if the call had dropped. Miss Rodriguez Ellis, are you sure about this? The social media response has been overwhelmingly supportive of your position. Showing mercy to someone who treated you with such disrespect, it could be seen as weakness. Amara smiled at something only she could see. I am about to demonstrate technology that will change the aviation industry forever. My company's valuation will increase by hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 6 months. I have the personal phone number of your CEO and a platform that reaches millions of people. She paused. I do not think anyone is going to mistake mercy for weakness. An hour later, as Amara's satellite demonstration proceeded flawlessly, 39,000 feet over the Atlantic, Eleanor Whitaker sat in the VIP lounge at JFK Airport, staring at a phone number she had been given by David Chen. The apology video she had recorded 20 minutes earlier was already being edited and prepared for release. It was not easy to watch herself acknowledge her racist assumptions, her sense of entitlement, her willingness to demand that Amara sacrifice her comfort for Eleanor's convenience. But it was honest, and it was necessary. Eleanor dialed the number with shaking hands. Amara Rodriguez Ellis speaking. Miss Rodriguez Ellis, this is Eleanor Whitaker. I am calling to thank you for something I do not deserve. Amara's voice was calm, professional. Miss Whitaker, I trust you made your apology video. I did, and I want you to know that it was not just for show. Watching myself on that airplane, hearing my own words played back, I am ashamed of who I was today. Good. Shame can be useful if it leads to change. Eleanor swallowed hard. Your recommendation got me on a flight that will get me to Paris with 6 hours to spare before the ceremony. After what I put you through, after the things I said, why would you do that for me? Amara was quiet for a moment, and Eleanor could hear the subtle hum of aircraft engines in the background. Miss Whitaker, I could have let you miss your daughter's wedding. It would have been justified. It would have been fair by most people's standards. But I have learned that having power means using it in ways that create the world you want to live in. I do not understand. I want to live in a world where people are held accountable for their choices, but not destroyed by their mistakes, where consequences are educational rather than purely punitive, where mercy is possible even after justice has been served. Eleanor felt tears gathering in her eyes. How do I make this right? You complete the bias training. You think seriously about why you made the assumptions you made today, and you use your experience to help other people recognize and address their own prejudices. And if I do all that? Amara's voice carried a slight smile. Then you get to walk your daughter down the aisle tomorrow, and maybe you become someone she can be proud of again. After the call ended, Eleanor Whitaker sat in the airport lounge and thought about the woman who had just shown her what grace looked like when it had teeth. Meanwhile, 39,000 feet above the Atlantic, Amara Rodriguez Ellis closed her laptop as the European Space Consortium confirmed their approval of the satellite navigation system that would revolutionize commercial aviation. The technology demonstration had been flawless. The contract was worth billions. SkyNav Technologies was officially the future of the industry. But as Amara looked out the window at the endless expanse of ocean below, she knew the demonstration that mattered most had nothing to do with satellites or navigation systems. She had shown the world what it looked like to stand your ground, without sacrificing your humanity, to demand justice without abandoning mercy, to use power in service of principles rather than ego. Her phone buzzed with notifications, thousands of them. Messages of support, interview requests, partnership proposals, speaking invitations. The story of Flight 847 was becoming something larger than a single incident of discrimination and accountability. Amara turned off her phone and closed her eyes, letting the steady hum of the engines carry her toward a future that was bright with possibility and grounded in the understanding that real change happened one choice at a time. By the time Amara's flight was halfway across the Atlantic, the story of Flight 847 had evolved from viral video to global conversation. In corporate boardrooms and coffee shops, in university classrooms and airport lounges, people were discussing not just what had happened, but what it meant for how power, privilege, and accountability intersected in everyday situations. Julian Mendoza stood in the emergency conference room at Atlantic Airlines headquarters, facing a room full of senior executives whose expressions ranged from concerned to panicked. The PR department had been fielding calls for hours straight. Legal was reviewing every policy and procedure related to passenger disputes. Operations was trying to calculate the cost of implementing new training protocols across a workforce of thousands of employees. "The good news," Julian said, addressing the room, "is that our response has been overwhelmingly positive. We acted quickly, transparently, and decisively." Amara Rodriguez Ellis's statement about bias management has been shared by major news outlets. Our stock price is actually up because investors see this as evidence of strong ethical leadership. The Chief Operating Officer, Sarah Martinez, leaned forward. "And the bad news?" "The bad news is that this incident has exposed training gaps and cultural issues that go far beyond one flight attendant's poor judgment. We need complete reform of how we handle passenger conflicts, and we need it implemented immediately." Julian pulled up a presentation that his team had been working on for the past hours. Effective immediately, we are implementing what we are calling the Dignity Protocol. 3 simple principles. Policy compliance is not optional, regardless of passenger status. Crew members who ask the wronged party to compromise will be immediately suspended, and every passenger dispute will be resolved based on facts, not volume. The room absorbed this in silence. Thousands of employees, hundreds of daily flights, thousands of passenger interactions every day. The scope of what Julian was proposing was staggering. "Sir," the Human Resources Director said carefully, "the training costs alone will be less than the cost of one major discrimination lawsuit," Julian interrupted, "and significantly less than the cost of losing Amara Rodriguez Ellis as a partner." That sobered the room. Amara's technology contract represented the future of Atlantic Airlines' competitive advantage. Losing her would be catastrophic, not just financially, but strategically. "How is Miss Rodriguez Ellis responding to the media attention?" Sarah asked. Julian smiled slightly. "She is handling it exactly the way you would expect someone who built $1 billion company by the age of 32 to handle it, with grace, intelligence, and a focus on constructive change rather than retribution." He pulled up Amara's recorded statement on his tablet. "She has turned this into a teaching moment about institutional bias and individual accountability. The conversation is not about Atlantic Airlines being terrible. It is about how organizations can do better when they are willing to face uncomfortable truths." Meanwhile, in a conference room 3 blocks away, Ryan Callahan sat across from Employee Relations Director Lisa Thompson and Union Representative Michael Torres. Ryan's career with Atlantic Airlines was over. That had been clear from the moment Julian Mendoza's voice came through Amara's phone speaker. The question now was whether he would face additional consequences beyond termination. "Ryan," Lisa said, "we have reviewed the incident report, the video footage, and the witness statements. Your actions violated multiple company policies regarding equal treatment of passengers, proper conflict resolution, and adherence to seating assignments." Ryan nodded numbly. He had been replaying those minutes for hours, seeing his choices from every angle, understanding exactly how each decision had revealed assumptions he had not even known he was making. "I understand," Ryan said quietly. "I want to state for the record that I take full responsibility for my actions. I made assumptions based on unconscious bias, and I let those assumptions guide my professional decisions. That is inexcusable. Michael Torres, the union representative, leaned forward. Ryan, the union is prepared to fight this termination if you believe it was unjust. Ryan looked at him with surprise. Unjust? Michael, I asked a passenger to give up her seat to accommodate someone who was clearly in the wrong. I did that because I made assumptions about who would be more reasonable based on how they looked and how they acted. That is the definition of discriminatory treatment. You were trying to de-escalate a difficult situation. No, Ryan interrupted. I was trying to make my job easier by asking the black woman to sacrifice her rights instead of enforcing the rules with the white woman. Let us call it what it was. Lisa Thompson made notes on her tablet. Ryan's willingness to acknowledge his bias and accept responsibility would be noted in his file. It would not save his job, but it might help him find another one. Ryan, Atlantic Airlines is implementing a new training program on bias recognition and conflict resolution. If you are interested in completing that program voluntarily, it could help with future employment opportunities. Ryan nodded immediately. I am interested. I need to understand how I made those assumptions so I never make them again. 3 hours later, Ryan walked out of Atlantic Airlines headquarters without his employee badge, his access codes, or his career. But he had something else, a clear understanding of how unconscious bias worked and a commitment to ensuring he never again let assumptions about race influence his decisions. It would be a long road back to employment in the airline industry, but it was a road that led somewhere better than where he had been. At JFK Airport, Eleanor Whitaker sat in the first-class lounge recording the second take of her apology video. The first take had been defensive, full of justifications and excuses. The second take was harder to watch, but more honest. My name is Eleanor Whitaker, she said to her phone's camera. Yesterday, I was removed from an Atlantic Airlines flight for refusing to sit in my assigned seat and making discriminatory comments to a fellow passenger. She paused, looking directly into the lens. I want to be clear about what happened. I was in the wrong seat. When asked to move, I refused because I felt entitled to the seat I wanted rather than the seat I had paid for. When the passenger with the correct boarding pass asked me to move, I dismissed her concerns and questioned her right to be in first class. Eleanor's voice shook slightly, but she continued. I made assumptions about this woman based on her race, her age, and her appearance. I assumed she would be willing to compromise her rights for my convenience. I assumed my status as a frequent flyer gave me the right to ignore airline policies. I was wrong on every count. The hardest part came next. The woman I treated so poorly yesterday showed me more grace than I deserved by ensuring I could still attend my daughter's wedding. She had every right to let me face the full consequences of my actions. Instead, she chose mercy. I hope to earn that mercy by becoming someone who stands up against discrimination instead of perpetuating it. Eleanor ended the recording and sent it to the PR firm that Atlantic Airlines had recommended. Within an hour, it would be posted across social media platforms with a statement of commitment to complete bias training and volunteer with organizations working to combat discrimination in public accommodations. It would not undo the damage Eleanor had done to Amara Rodriguez Ellis or to herself or to her relationship with her daughter, but it was a beginning. Emma Palmer Chen sat in her hotel room in Paris watching her mother's apology video for the third time. The wedding was tomorrow. The guest list had been carefully curated to include only people who supported Emma's choices and respected her values. Eleanor Whitaker had not been on that list. Emma's phone rang, her mother's number. Mom, Emma, I know you do not want to talk to me right now. I know I have disappointed you more times than I can count, but I want you to know that I am going to be better. What happened on that airplane showed me something about myself that I did not want to see, but needed to confront. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Mom, do you understand why I did not invite you to the wedding? Because I have spent my life believing that my comfort was more important than other people's dignity. Because I have made you ashamed to be my daughter. The honesty in Eleanor's voice surprised Emma. This was not the defensive, justifying tone she was used to hearing from her mother. What has changed, Mom? I met someone yesterday who showed me the difference between using power to get your way and using power to do what is right. I want to learn to be the second kind of person. Emma looked out her hotel window at the Paris skyline. Tomorrow she would marry the love of her life in a ceremony that celebrated equality, justice, and mutual respect. For years, she had assumed her mother could never be part of that celebration. "Mom, if you come to the wedding, can you promise me something?" "Anything. Promise me you will listen more than you talk. Promise me you will treat every person there with the same respect you want them to show you. Promise me you will remember that being my mother does not make you special. It makes you responsible for representing the values I am trying to live by." Eleanor felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I promise, Emma. And I promise that the woman who showed up on that airplane yesterday will not be the woman who walks you down the aisle tomorrow." When the call ended, Emma sat quietly for a few minutes, thinking about second chances, earned redemption, and the possibility that people really could change when the consequences of not changing became unbearable. Then she called her wedding planner and added one more name to the guest list. Meanwhile, at 39,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, Amara Rodriguez Ellis was fielding interview requests from major news outlets. CNN wanted a statement. The BBC was requesting a live interview upon landing. The New York Times was working on a feature story about discrimination in air travel and corporate accountability. Amara declined them all. Instead, she spent the remaining hours of the flight writing a detailed case study of the incident for Harvard Business School, where she had earned her MBA years earlier. The case study would be used to teach future business leaders about bias recognition, ethical decision-making under pressure, and the difference between managing problems and solving them. She titled it, "The Economics of Dignity, a Case Study in Real-Time Corporate Accountability." It would become required reading in business ethics courses at universities around the world. As Flight 847 began its descent into London Heathrow, Amara reflected on the past hours. She had demonstrated technology that would change the aviation industry. She had secured a contract worth billions of dollars. She had forced policy changes at a major corporation. But most importantly, she had proven that standing your ground did not require sacrificing your values, and that justice was most powerful when it left room for redemption. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud, and Amara Rodriguez Ellis prepared to step into a world that was slightly more just than the one she had left behind. 6 months later, Amara Rodriguez Ellis stood at the podium of the International Aviation Safety Conference in Geneva, looking out at an audience of airline executives, government regulators, and industry innovators from dozens of countries. The speech she was about to give had been requested by the conference organizers, not because of her satellite navigation technology, though that had revolutionized the industry, but because of what had happened in Seat 1A of Flight 847. "Ladies and gentlemen," Amara began, "I want to tell you about the most important demonstration of my career. It did not happen in a laboratory or a boardroom. It happened at 35,000 feet when I was asked to give up my seat to accommodate someone else's racism." The audience was completely silent. Amara's story had become legend in aviation circles, but this was the first time she had spoken about it publicly at an industry event. "I did not ground that flight for revenge," Amara continued. "I grounded it for change. Because discrimination is not just a social justice issue, it is a safety issue. When we make decisions based on bias rather than facts, when we prioritize comfort over policy, when we ask the wrong person to compromise to solve a problem, we create the kind of cultural dysfunction that leads to much larger failures." Amara clicked to her first slide, showing Atlantic Airlines safety and customer satisfaction scores before and after implementing the Dignity Protocol. 6 months ago, Atlantic Airlines was performing at industry average for both safety compliance and customer satisfaction. Today, they lead the industry in both categories, not because they hired new pilots or bought new planes, but because they addressed the cultural issues that were undermining everything else they were trying to achieve. The numbers were compelling. Customer complaints down dramatically, employee satisfaction up significantly. Most remarkably, safety incident reports up, not because Atlantic was less safe, but because crew members were more willing to report problems instead of managing around them. When you teach people to enforce policies consistently, regardless of who is involved, they become better at recognizing when something is not right. When you reward honesty over harmony, people start speaking up about potential problems before they become actual emergencies. Amara's voice carried the quiet authority that had made her one of the most respected voices in aerospace technology. The lesson of Flight 847 is not about airline seating. It is about the difference between managing problems and solving them. For too long, our industry has managed around discrimination, bias, and cultural dysfunction instead of solving the underlying issues. That approach does not just hurt individual passengers. It compromises our operational effectiveness. In the audience, Captain Sofia Ramirez nodded appreciatively. Sofia had been promoted to Director of Safety Training for Atlantic Airlines, where she was implementing the protocols that Amara's experience had inspired. The changes went far beyond passenger conflicts to include everything from maintenance reporting to crew communication standards. Ryan Callahan sat in the back row taking notes. After completing an intensive bias recognition program, Ryan had been hired by a smaller regional airline where his experience with the consequences of unconscious prejudice had made him uniquely valuable for training other crew members. His story had become a case study in how people could learn from catastrophic mistakes. He had asked Amara for permission to attend her speech. She had not only granted it, but had paid for his travel expenses. "I want to read you something," Amara said, pulling out her phone. "This is a message I received yesterday from a young woman named Sarah Chen, a flight attendant with Pacific Air." Amara read from the screen. "Miss Rodriguez Ellis, yesterday I was working a flight where a passenger was being disruptive and racist toward another passenger. 6 months ago, I would have tried to manage the situation by asking the targeted passenger to move seats to avoid further conflict. Instead, I remembered your story. I enforced our policies consistently, removed the disruptive passenger, and ensured that the person being harassed did not have to sacrifice anything for someone else's bad behavior. It felt scary, but it felt right. Thank you for showing me the difference." Amara looked up from her phone. That message represents more than individual growth. It represents cultural change at scale. When we make the right choice visible, when we show people that accountability is possible and necessary, we create permission for others to act with courage instead of convenience. The applause was sustained and genuine. Amara had articulated something that everyone in the industry had felt, but few had been able to express: the connection between ethical leadership and operational excellence. During the question and answer session, a young aviation executive from Lufthansa raised her hand. "Miss Rodriguez Ellis, critics have argued that your approach to the Flight 847 incident was too harsh, that Ryan Callahan's career should not have been ended over a single mistake. How do you respond to that?" Amara considered the question carefully. "I think that criticism misunderstands both accountability and mercy. Ryan's career with Atlantic Airlines ended because he made decisions based on racial bias that violated company policy and basic principles of equal treatment. That is not harsh. That is consequence." She paused, looking toward the back of the room where Ryan sat. But Ryan's career in aviation did not end. He used the consequence of his mistake to become someone who could help others recognize and address their own biases. He is now training crew members at Regional Express, and his work has contributed to their significant reduction in passenger discrimination complaints. Amara smiled slightly. Ryan learned something from his mistake that he could not have learned any other way. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is let people face the full weight of their choices. After the speech, Amara was approached by dozens of aviation professionals who wanted to discuss implementing similar protocols at their airlines. The Dignity Protocol had been adopted by major carriers, with more expressing interest every month. But the conversation that stayed with Amara happened in the hallway outside the conference room, where Emma Palmer Chen was waiting with a young woman about her own age. "Miss Rodriguez Ellis," Emma approached tentatively. "I am Emma Palmer Chen, Eleanor Whitaker's daughter." Amara recognized her immediately. The resemblance was unmistakable, though Emma carried herself with a quiet confidence that her mother was still learning. "Emma, how is your mother?" "She is different. Better. She completed the bias training program, and she has been volunteering with an organization that helps businesses address workplace discrimination. She talks about Flight 847 as the day she learned the difference between being right and being fair. Emma paused, choosing her words carefully. She asked me to give you this. Emma handed Amara an envelope. She said you would understand what it meant. Amara opened the envelope and found a single photograph. Eleanor Whitaker, standing with a group of diverse business owners at what appeared to be a training seminar. On the back, Eleanor had written, "Thank you for showing me that power is meant to be used for something better than getting your way." Amara looked up at Emma. "How was the wedding?" Emma smiled, the first genuine smile Amara had seen from anyone in the Whitaker family. "Perfect. Mom walked me down the aisle, and for the first time in my life, I was proud to have her there. She listened more than she talked, treated everyone with respect, and spent the reception asking my friends about their work instead of talking about her own status." The young woman standing beside Emma stepped forward. "Miss Rodriguez Ellis, I am Dr. Lisa Chen, Emma's wife. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did, not just on the flight, but afterward. Showing Eleanor Whitaker mercy when you could have let her face the full consequences. That changed our family." Amara felt something settle in her chest, a kind of completion she had not expected. "Dr. Chen, how did it change your family?" Emma spent years being ashamed of her mother's behavior, ashamed of the privilege and prejudice she represented. After Flight 847, Emma watched her mother genuinely confront her own bias and work to become someone better. Now, Emma is not ashamed anymore. She is proud of who her mother is becoming. Amara nodded slowly. This was what she had hoped for when she had called Atlantic Airlines to ensure Eleanor Whitaker could make the wedding. Not forgiveness without accountability, but transformation through consequences combined with the opportunity for redemption. "There is something else," Emma said. "My mother wanted you to know that she has endowed a scholarship at Howard University for students pursuing careers in aerospace technology. It is called the Amara Rodriguez Ellis Scholarship for Innovation and Ethics." Amara felt tears gathering in her eyes.
"Emma, that is not necessary."
"Yes, it is. My mother spent 52 years using her privilege to make other people smaller. She wants to spend whatever years she has left using it to make other people bigger." As Amara walked back to her hotel that evening, she thought about the arc of the past 6 months. Her satellite navigation technology was now standard across most major airlines, improving safety and efficiency in ways that would save thousands of lives over the coming decades. SkyNav Technologies was valued at over $2 billion with expansion plans across 3 continents. But the changes that mattered most were harder to quantify. Ryan Callahan training new flight attendants to recognize their own biases, Isabella Reyes and dozens of other crew members choosing accountability over convenience, Eleanor Whitaker using her resources to create opportunities instead of demanding privileges. Amara's phone buzzed with a text message from Julian Mendoza. "Saw your speech online. Brilliant as always. Question: Are you ready to expand the dignity protocol beyond aviation? I have been getting calls from hospitality companies, retail chains, healthcare organizations. Everyone wants to know how to build accountability into their customer service culture." Amara smiled as she typed her response. "Send me the details, but I have one condition." "What is that?" "Ryan Callahan gets to co-lead the training program. He knows more about the consequences of bias than anyone I have ever met." "Done. Amara. Thank you for showing us that doing the right thing does not have to mean sacrificing business success. Sometimes it is the path to both." Amara put her phone away and looked up at the stars above Geneva. Somewhere up there, her satellites were guiding aircraft safely across continents, helping pilots navigate around storms and find the most efficient routes to their destinations. Down here, the navigation was more complex but equally important, helping people find their way to treating each other with dignity, respect, and fairness. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. She had learned that power was not about making people bow. It was about building a world where no one had to. And sometimes the most revolutionary thing you could do was simply refuse to move from where you belonged. Stand your ground with grace and show the world what justice looked like when it made room for everyone's humanity. Amara walked into the hotel lobby, past the comfortable chairs and soft lighting, knowing that tomorrow she would return to her work of changing the world, one algorithm, one policy, one choice at a time. But tonight, she would simply rest in the knowledge that standing your ground could open up space for everyone else to stand a little taller too. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that dignity is not negotiable, and that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is refusing to be moved from where you belong, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to sit in the seat they paid for. Smash the subscribe button if you want to see more stories about people who stood their ground when it mattered most. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters, their presence matters, and their refusal to be small makes space for others to be bigger. The quiet revolution starts with each of us deciding we will not accept that some people matter less than others. Your story matters. Your ground is worth standing on. And the world is watching to see who will have the courage to say, "This stops here. This stops now. This stops with me." Stand your ground. Change is coming, and it starts with you.